big welcome to you, Murray, and congratulations on your wonderful recipe. We really enjoyed having you in the studio, and it was a scintillating conversation. And now we have a scintillating recipe that is live on the Heavy Chef platform. So welcome, sir. Welcome back to Heavy Chef, and it's good to see your face again.
Thank you. Super to be working with you guys and sharing this kind of info.
Awesome. I wanted to kick off with just a little bit. As I said, I'm going to make this a bit of a free-ranging conversation. So we're going to go a little bit like BTS. I want to understand, what does a day in the life of Murray Legg look like? What happens? You know, you wake up and then, I mean, because you're a serial entrepreneur, you've got several businesses under your belt, and you have multiple interests. So I want to know what your daily kind of schedule looks like from an outside perspective.
Thanks, Fred. So yeah, I guess starting it in as energetic a way as possible is always my go-to. So whether it's a gym session or a cycle, that's my preference. Dropping the kids off at school, and then time at the office. And what I actually try and do is, until 11 o'clock, all of my devices are set to do not disturb. So I don't get any notifications. If I want to open WhatsApp or my emails, I can go there. But actually, I try and use until 11 o'clock as my kind of focus time to do the heavy work for the day. And that involves synthesizing information into some kind of an insight that could be valuable, whether it's in the business, to our community, to my partners, whatever that is. And then after 11, that's when you sort of go into operational mode, and that might involve joining a sales call, doing a debrief with a client after a campaign's happened, and analyzing, you know, what was the sentiment, how did things work out, what can we learn from it. But then also towards the end of the day, it's sort of a big proponent, and there's that adage about you are the average of the 5 people that are closest to you. I mean, when we're all not really close to people in real life anymore, but we're all digitally connected, the part that I try and make as much conscious effort towards is information diet. So at 3 o'clock, I have scheduled a whole bunch of Substacks and subscriptions, and then those sort of hit my inbox between 3:30, which is normally the US market open at that time. I've got an interest in the US market because I think that kind of steers a lot of the world that we live in. And I just do a lot of reading, and that reading then can turn into something to share, or something to digest, or something to apply. And then back home, time with the kids, dinner with my wife, and then depends what happens in the evening. Could be a glass of wine, could be more work.
Well, you live in Cape Town now, so a glass of wine is pretty much de rigueur. I wanted to ask you, I mean, I read something about Daniel Ek, the founder of Spotify, and how he went from, I mean, he was a developer and, you know, a very extraordinarily talented entrepreneur, somebody who's hyper intelligent. He transitioned from a life of absolute busyness, where, you know, he would wake up at ridiculous hours in the morning. He would open up his laptop, he would code, he'd just work, he would drink energy drinks, and just, like, you know, continually just, you know, absolutely slam it until, you know, 12 o'clock at night, and then wash, rinse, repeat. And he said that it was no longer serving him. So now he has obviously one of the biggest companies in the world, with one of the biggest reaches in the world. He spends the first 5 or 6 hours of his day just puttering around because of the same thing of information diet. And I think it's so important to that you said this, that, you know, there's this idea of being intentional about what you feed your brain, and what you feed your mind, what you feed your body, and how impactful that is for the rest of your work. And I think it's that sort of balance. So do you feel like you have attained that, a kind of a balance in that way?
I don't think so, and I think for everyone it's different depending on where they are in their journey. Sometimes it just requires hours and hours of slog, to get things over the line, and sometimes it's if we afforded the benefit of time, which I think is what as entrepreneurs that's ultimately the goal. It's not seeking money, it's seeking time, and if we can get the benefit of time in some shape or form, then and we can invest it wisely, not in doom scrolling, not in replying to emails, because there's always going to be more than enough of that out there. You're never going to get to the bottom of it. So if you can be intentional with your time, then I think you've reached some degree of harmony. Absolutely.
Sure. There seems to be this kind of transitioning now from FOMO to, what do they call it? JOMO, the joy of missing out. This idea that actually letting go and allowing for the world to happen without our intervention or observation is actually quite a healthy thing to do, without just continually having this, this fire hose that we're drinking from in terms of the sheer amount of content that's happening. And speaking of content, there is a community that you're very tapped into that is a community of influencers. So, I think with regards to the idea of influence as a business, how did that start in terms of creating something that would tap into this amazing and very kind of, it's an amorphous world, it's something which is difficult to quantify, because what makes somebody influential, right? So I'm going to get to the what makes someone influential, but what motivated you to get into this? Where did this kind of the spark start of influence as a business?
It's probably easier to answer in hindsight, because at the time, I think there were many days and months that we all thought that we were getting this totally wrong and we had gone off piste and this was not the direction. So, when you go look at 2014 when we started, this was very nascent. But looking back on it, I think the genesis point was scarcity of attention, and so we live in the attention economy. And social capital is the measure of, the sum total of all the attention that's available. So you have so many hours in the day and you've got so much focus. And then where do you put that focus? Onto which screen or which person or which piece of work? And then how can someone monetize? How can someone pay to be part of that attention span? And then maybe something happens as a result. So the creator economy and the influencer business is all premised on the persuasion effect and ultimately influence. But it really was to do with scarcity. So we took the bet that there would become more content than there were available hours in the day to watch it. And those creators that were engaging the right way with their audiences and their communities were going to be the ones that garnered sort of all of the support. And some of that social capital they could turn into favor, some they could turn into money, some they could turn into movement, movement of a crowd or a belief system or whatever. So that was the bet, and I think we were lucky that it worked out more or less in that way.
I actually remember when you first started, I had a chat with Mike Sharman, and I saw what you were doing, and I immediately thought, oh, this is clever. Like, it feels like there was something so, as much as it was nascent and it was a powerful idea, this idea of Webfluential and creating a community of influencers, there was also something timeless about it. The idea of an influencer was not new, I guess. From Britney Spears to Michael Jackson back in the day, and Michael J. Fox with Pepsi and Coke wars and all that kind of stuff. And even before then, Michael Jordan is probably the most obvious and best example of an influencer. Still a $1 billion industry with apparel. What makes somebody influential?
You could even rewind the time there, and you could say to some of our religious figures, some of them had 12 followers to start. So there's some fairly timeless pieces there. But yeah, Fred, I appreciate the compliment, and thanks for being one of those early people to see that this was a good place to move. Yeah, I mean, it's something that we keep learning about. What makes someone influential? There's the essence of it, which I think is the credibility and the authenticity. So, is this person turning up and saying the same thing that we can believe? And I mean, we touched a little bit earlier on kind of the science and the art. So the art of building a following and garnering trust is in storytelling. And if you can do that really well, you can evoke an emotional response from people. And if you have to look at the scientific side of it, there has to be consistency. So you have to be able to say, this is the truthful representation of my story over and over and over, told in a different way, which sparks that emotional response and almost community building element of what happens after the fact. So, if you have to take that into your everyday, it's really that. It's, are you a good storyteller? And what are the lessons that you can start with there? And I mean, I've come to learn that actually reading, the information diet we talked about, then writing, it almost helps you synthesize that into something, and then being able to communicate it. It's actually quite three big jumps that you have to be able to do, because I think where a lot of us sort of find ourselves enjoying content a lot is listening to podcasts and videos where some other sense maker has made sense of whatever the topic is that we listen to, and we're enjoying the listening part. The harder part is to then say, okay, let's go and journal on that and write down what we thought that we remembered. And then you realize that person actually has a lot of credibility, because they can do it so much better than what I can if I try to journal that, let alone talk about it just in an open setting. So yeah, there are some leaps to be able to make, but it's storytelling. And I think the compliments that we have now, and why this industry has been fast-tracked, is because of all of the digital tools and AI that is in support of it. So, that's helped with video production. We've got 11 Labs to do voiceovers. We've got Midjourney to do images, all sorts of, CapCut to do quick video edits, all sorts of really cool stuff that we can use. So anyone can be a storyteller to an audience that is as big as the global population, potentially.
Yeah. I mean, we're undoubtedly moving into a very interesting space. And I mean, speaking of storytelling, Heavy Chef has just launched this book, and it's available pretty much in all bookstores. And the reason why we focused on storytelling as a topic, as an important topic for entrepreneurs, is because we are so inundated with so much noise that in order to rise above the noise, it's crucial for us to be able to understand the tenets of good storytelling. We have this horrible term in marketing. We call the people that we target in terms of as businesses, consumers. And they're consumers. And the thing is with this idea of what is a consumer, when we are consumers, we need to be able to. I loved what you said about the idea of consuming the content, but then journaling about it afterwards, and being able to almost alchemize what we receive into something valuable and important. And that's crucial. It's this idea of evolving from a consumer into a contributor. And that evolution is something that entrepreneurs understand really well. So my question then is, with the central theme of your answer in the previous question being storytelling, what makes a good story? What is something that actually would be able to rise above the noise? And I understand that's like the $1 million question. But I mean, you have a whole community of folks who are telling stories.
Yeah, and I love the word that you used there, alchemize. That's a brilliant word. Definitely gonna see if I can use that in more context. So what makes a good storyteller? So every story has kind of a first person, and that first person has to relate to your audience, because the audience has to imagine that they're on a similar journey. So your story should be representative of someone or something that represents that audience. And then they have a particular, setting, or they have a particular life. They're positioned in terms of identity. So these are the things that they did. These are the things that they like. So you go and knit together that the subject of the story is very representative of the audience. Then they face some big challenge. There's a demon or a monster, or something in their life doesn't go according to plan. Then how do they get out of it? And that's normally, either they had to go and draw on someone else's expertise, they had to find some inner realization, or they had to upgrade their wetware somehow, their view on life to be able to process this. And then after that, they potentially become the hero of the story. And so what you're doing is you're selling a transformation. And when you can go from what you were to something that you could be, and along the way, there's a certain transformation that's either in terms of things that you know, things that you do, or products that you need to help you in that transformation, that's effectively where the brand narrative kind of comes in on this media world. Because there's the aspirational kind of objective. So everybody wants to be like a certain group of people. They might not be there already, but they want to go through that transformation. So if your story goes, helps someone understand the journey that they're on and the transformation they might be looking to do, that is typically the thing that resonates the most.
I love that. What's really important for me in that, I mean, we actually speak about it in the book, is that the trap that most or many entrepreneurs fall into when trying to tell a story, either consciously or subconsciously, is that we position ourselves, the entrepreneur, the person who is offering something, as the hero. So we position ourselves as the hero, as opposed to seeing our customer, our client, as the hero. And it's such a simple transition. It's such a simple hack in terms of we have to always remind ourselves that we are not the hero of our client's journey. Their hero's journey is something that is deeply personal to them. And so our role is of the sage. We're the person who's going to help them along their journey. We're going to be the Yoda or the Gandalf or the Obi-Wan in this narrative, and for us to give them the lightsaber or the magic potion or whatever it is that will help them along the way. And it's such a small but obvious thing, and well, actually a small but not so obvious thing to many of us. I mean, even I've been studying storytelling for so long now, and I still, in my own communication, make that mistake. So it's important to just continually remind ourselves of that. And I wanted to then ask you, it's a two-parter in terms of the next question would be, many of the people who are going to watch this are going to be small businesses. And we have some of our invitees on the call here, some of the facilitators and the people who are working in the communities, who are, we're talking about small business entrepreneurs who don't have a huge amount of budget. We don't have, the kind of money to be able to pay Amanda DuPont, R1 million or DJ Sprue to come up on stage. We have limited resources, limited budgets, and I guess the first question is, how do we deploy influencer marketing in terms of how do we think about it in our own strategy? And then I think the second one, which I want to get your answer on the first one. The second one is going to be, how do we actually become influential ourselves in terms of elevating our own status to a position of authority, of influence?
Yeah, those are super questions. And I mean, I guess I would answer them as one, and maybe just to hat tip to your previous reference. So Michael Jordan is a great example there. And why he was so successful is because everyone wanted to be the world's best basket player. And every kid lying in bed at night looked up at the ceiling and they were like, one day I could be like him. And if I have the same shoes as him, maybe I could be like him. And that's sort of where you see that narrative coming into play. So if you're a small business, or if you're an individual that wants to become an influencer, the thing that you can start with is to grow your social capital. So where I see so many entrepreneurs making a mistake is they say, I need money to deliver on this idea. And the world we live in now, that's not the way to go about it. It's actually the most expensive way to go about it, because by bringing on money, it's a lot of work, but then B, you give away a large portion often of your company, and you have other people that are now part of your company in terms of giving it the steer because they are shareholders. But the thing that you can do that's the most cost effective is build your social capital. And your social capital is what we mentioned before. It's the trust and authenticity that you have, and it's the platform that you use to be able to talk about it. So if you're a business and you talk about these burgers that you make and they are fantastic, you should tell people about that. And you should authentically be able to say, we make the best burgers in town and you should come and try them. And people should be, they should believe that, and then they should try and do them. So if you're building that credibility yourself, that's the first start. The next thing that happens is some of the people that walk in the door to try your burgers sometimes have a really big following on one of the social media channels. And often small businesses don't even have the mechanic in play to ask for a referral or ask for a shout out on social. But really, that's the starting point, is because you never know who might walk in the door that has 100,000 followers, has an incredible experience eating your burger, and then doesn't know what to do with that information. But if you've got a mechanic to engage with them and say, please, can you share this? Or please, can you refer your friends? Or please, can you just, give us a review on Google Business? That's all positive. Those things are timeless. They're timeless investments into the credibility and authenticity that you're looking to develop, and they cost you nothing. So if you're the business or you're the individual, that's what you should start with. Start your narrative, share your narrative, and if it resonates with people, they're going to start sharing that too, and then you start building your following.
That's great. I love what Lovejoy said in the comment here in the chat. What many entrepreneurs do is look at the big guys, and sometimes influencer marketing can work with a niche influencer. It's about seeing who they talk to and how they engage with their audience, and it speaks to what you're talking about, this idea of being authentic and really owning your space. I remember there's an OG of marketing, a guy called Al Reese. I don't know if you remember him, but he wrote something like, it was one of those listicle books, like the 22 immutable laws of branding or something like that. And I still remember, this is like 20 odd years ago, I read this book, and it was such a good lesson. Like in terms of branding and brand positioning, always be number one or number two in your market, right? So basically ensure that you are seen as the leader in your niche, right? So whatever that may be. And if you cannot be, and this is the rule number, so that's rule number one. Rule number two, if you cannot be number one or number two in your niche, you need to create a new niche. And it's so clever, because it's like, well, if I can't be the best burgers in South Africa, maybe I can be the best burgers in Hart Bay, and or in Strand or Lwandle, or I can be the best burgers in Seshego, like try and identify where we can be number one or number two, and then speak with authority about that, because then we have influence, right? And I love this idea of authenticity, because I would love to get your take on this new term which people are calling, I guess, AI slop, where AI is becoming, in its own way influential, because we can, at the click of a button or a prompt, we could say, create a video and speak to the topic that I'm interested in, or I think that my audience is interested in. And it's just flooding our feeds with so much of this slop. And so I guess, how then do we respond to that as entrepreneurs? How then is it, do we lean in? Do we, if we can't beat them, join them? Like, how can we meet this AI slop in the middle and actually bend it to our will or make it useful for us? Or do we just continue on a different path?
It's amazing how in a very short space of time, say in the last 2 years, if you were an early adopter of AI and you were using it in your content production or something, then you were seen as like a leading edge kind of participant in the space. Like people are like, wow, that dude or that guy is really clever because they're doing that AI thing. And now it's totally gone the reverse direction, where if someone reads something that you've written and it's basically just a copy paste from Claude or ChatGPT, you actually lose credibility. And I think that's the risk, actually. So matching to what you're saying about authenticity is, if you're posting something that is not actually authentically you, but it was authentically one of the LLMs, that's good for the LLM. It's not so good for you because all you did was copy paste. So the risk here is that we are outsourcing our thinking and our critical thinking to these language models. And of course, they are incredibly articulate at finding nuances and patterns and things that we can't. But you should almost use it as a guide, as a sounding board, as a reference to be able to ping a few of your ideas to, and then be able to evolve those. But you should still be writing them yourself. And if you're writing them yourself, you've got a bigger context window. The context window is basically like ChatGPT can't remember the conversation that you had with it a couple of days ago, but you can remember your entire existence of your life. So you've got a lot more context to be able to say, this is why I think a certain way, or how things work or hang together. And so AI slop is really just like that very long form thing that's full of in dashes and title case headings, that we then go and we get the long form thing, we put it in and we say, please give me the summary, and then you get what you could have got from the person at the get-go. So for sure, I think it's a positive tool. I think just because of how easy it's been made to utilize, that's possibly where we just kind of slipping off, drifting a little bit in terms of missing what we could have added to the conversation by just getting someone else to add that. So yeah, that's I think the caution and the benefit. So depends how people use them to see if it's a good or a bad thing.
How are you using AI, out of interest, in terms of you yourself and also Webfluential?
So I mean, we use it a lot. One of the things that we've actually used quite effectively is, so with Gemini, which is Google's AI, we've imported all of the campaigns that we've ever run and all of the performance that they've ever had. And so on Gemini, you can write what's called a gem. And a gem is basically like your own ingested kind of chatbot. And then that has all of the context of your business. And when we take in a brief from a client, we're inputting it in that meeting into our gem to say, this is what the client wants to do. This is the target market. This is how they're thinking about going about it. And then it will go and basically ingest all of the decade of work that we've done and say, this is what we think could be a strategy in terms of ideas. And we can use that as kind of idea prompters to say, you could do this, this, or this, and this works, and this from a competitor has worked well, this hasn't. So we've kind of got it on hand almost as another participant in the meeting to be able to add another dimension. And then, I mean, that's probably the most common one. And then just in terms of kind of using these creative tools, because we work with creators, so understanding how Midjourney works, understanding how VO3 works. So it's more just like having a little bit of fun with it, just to understand what's possible. Less so using it for execution, more just awareness.
I saw some of it was I think it was Casey Neistat did something recently where he commented, the YouTuber Casey Neistat, and he commented on how AI I mean, even in this very early stage of, the rise of AI, how unbelievably impressive it's becoming, but also how frightening in terms of the sheer volume of this so-called slop that is now being spread across the interwebs. And it's the early days. I mean, as somebody said, this is the worst it's going to be. It's only going to get better. And I wonder if you could look into the crystal ball and see. I mean, you see this new actress. I can't remember her name. Who's got her own. She's in a full-length movie now, and she's an AI apparition with an Instagram account and all the associated channels. I mean, it's crazy how realistic she is, right? And she's ostensibly being cast in various movies and various roles and so on. So where's this going, Murray? Like, where do you see this, and where do you see the potential friction between what you do and what's happening in the future?
Sure. Hard one to look into that crystal ball. But Fred, I think one likely outcome is that people will become so overwhelmed with how much content there is. I mean, still that principle of aggregation towards the stagnation points of the people that have the authenticity. That's when there's so much content, people will be drawn more to those sense makers, influencers, creators, and probably unfollow everything else. So, I mean, if you spend time on the For You page on any of these channels, you just get given so much content. So I think where people will go is that they're actually just overwhelmed by how much digital content there is. So one likely outcome is that people just crave real world engagement even more. Events, in-person meetings, kind of vibing with people at work or at play. So, whether it's paddle or soccer or whatever it is, I think there's going to be a lot more reason for people to meet up in real life. And then as it goes into commerce, I guess one of the big ones, the downsides of it is fraud. So, any, like you mentioned the actress, but anyone can now impersonate me. They can phone my bank, they can mimic my voice, they'll know my information because I've connected my Gmail to this thing, and then they could say, yeah, this transaction must be made to me, but it's not me. So there's all sorts of impersonations and fraudulent things, and I mean, Facebook's often been plagued with this, is what's fake news. And
Yep.
And so, I mean, increasingly we're going to have to, like, when in the creator world, you're told when it's hashtag ad, hashtag sponsored, you're going to be told, I think, hashtag AI. So I think the channels are going to jump on that. So you're going to have some kind of watermark to all the videos and things that, because it's quite confusing. And you can almost see it. I find it quite comical. If you go and see some of the shared videos on Facebook, I don't know if it's because of the cohort of people that enjoy Facebook more than Instagram, but they have hundreds of thousands of likes of what's ostensibly an AI video of some lie. But these people thought it was hilarious, and they all liked it and they shared it and it carried on going. But actually, it's not real.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're definitely getting wrapped around the wheel of of the fakeness of this. So it will be interesting to see how that AI slop gets mitigated. I think, I mean, I saw yesterday ChatGPT also now is not giving legal or medical advice anymore. So you can't upload an X-ray, you can't upload some legal document. It can say this is the summary of it, but it's not giving, because of the dangers and the downside and the asymmetry of the risks associated with those things.
Yeah.
I think it's the right call to say, actually, you need to see a professional. So I think it could be a helper in a lot of things, but I don't think it replaces the professional. It should just be that assistant.
It's such a fascinating debate, I guess, in terms of, if we think about, how you get these horror stories of, where people have been led astray by AI without having, the right context, and people's lives being at stake because of a misinterpretation of medical data, for example, that can be transposed against the fallibility of humans. If you think of a tired radiologist working at 2 a.m. in the morning who has to go through literally hundreds of scans, from a week of work where they're doing double shifts, and how fallible, how prevalent human error is. And on the other side, I think what's fascinating to me, I was in San Francisco a few years ago, and one of the things that we did was, I was with a group of entrepreneurs. We went on a game drive, right? And the game drive in that setting was actually to go on a bus, literally through Palo Alto, and to spot the self-driving cars. And this is in 2019. So it was fascinating because even then there were self-driving cars, right? But they have not become ubiquitous for the very reason that you just mentioned, that, there's this, we speak about people now going, this movement towards IRL, where we want to be connecting with people. So you're getting an uptick in things like, analog coffee shops, where I was just in Copenhagen a few months ago, and there were signs saying no laptops, no cell phones, no Wi-Fi. Those sorts of things are becoming increasingly prevalent because people are valuing human connection in an age where we are not able to trust what we see on screens anymore. But at the same time, there is this reality, speaking of game drives and self-driving cars, where, someone like Elon will talk until he's blue in the face about the fact that when you have a vehicle with unlimited computing powers and cameras on every corner of this car, how much more accurate the driving experience will be in terms of accident prevention and safe driving for everybody, than a human who's had, either too much alcohol to drink or too much coffee to drink, And so it's such an interesting point where it's difficult to figure out where on the continuum we must sit and how we have to negotiate these new rules in our evolution on this planet. I think we're a bit far behind San Francisco and Palo Alto. They were talking about drones delivering, Amazon packages to people's mailboxes. I don't think we're ready for that. In Cape Town, at least. I hope not.
But maybe to your point there, Brad, and if we talk about information diet, there should also be kind of a decision diet or decision framework that we should have as people. And when we want to make big decisions, whether those are for ourselves or for our businesses or our finances, I think we've got to think about like doing a sense check. Maybe it's like it's phoning someone in your family, or soundboarding this off someone in your network, or there's just something that you want to do, because sometimes we get so hyped up about that thing, shiny thing, which could turn out to be Ponzi scheme, but it's beautifully wrapped in some AI, so you weren't led to believe that in the beginning. So we have to do that. And then the point around the science of it, and Elon, yesterday he made a comment about how like quantum computing is best done in the shadows of the craters of the moon, which is actually mind-blowing, but it's the truth. That's where you get the permanent freezing cold temperatures, where that can operate. So you also have this ability, and I think that's what's exciting about it, is we're living in this time where so much more is an option to us than what we had when we were all young. And it's how we choose to embrace this future that is so, and it's only going to get quicker, as you say. So it's incredible to be given this technology kind of boost, but we just have to figure out how does real life map to all of this technology, and where are we comfortable to say, I'm going to go ahead with this, I've got the right information diet and decision frameworks to be able to make sure that I'm not taking any unknown risk here.
I love that. I think there's such an important point there. And it also speaks to this idea. By the way, first of all, Elon, what a freaking sales guy. Because like he's saying that because you know that he's trying to like tap into the budget to get SpaceX going to the moon and putting up those friggin', you know, space stations and all that. And what a compelling dude, you know, and what a compelling message. Because, you know, all of this stuff is commercial at the end of the day. And I think one thing that's really interesting to me, and again, it goes back to your point around this idea of, you know, in an age of information overload, how important it is for us and also as entrepreneurs to identify what it is that we can speak with authority on. And that requires an inordinate amount of self-reflection, of personal perspective, that it speaks to quite a few things that you've touched on. Somebody quite wise said to me just before this call, actually, that we are the sum of 5 people. And so there's this idea of being curative, you know, or curatorial, I think it is, of who we hang out with, who we choose to be, you know, to be in the company of. Because those people, they give us a gift that is very hard to come by, which is authentic perspective, because it's hard to read the label from inside the bottle, right? So ultimately, when we surround ourselves with people that we trust and who are also authentic, and we are authentic to them, we get this feedback loop that is not necessarily, you know, self-serving. It's actually in the interest of improvement and growth, which is really important for entrepreneurs, right? I think, you know, the biggest myth that entrepreneurs face is this idea of the entrepreneur as a lone wolf. You know, that we can do this on our own, that we are the person that sits with a candle that burns brightly on both ends, because we just have to, you know, continually just slave away until we get that which we want. There has to be this almost paradoxical balance of being able to rest and recuperate. You know, it's why I loved what you revealed in the first question, this idea of, you know, until 11 o'clock, being able to you know, to take the time to be able to look at all the various elements that are interesting to you. And I think to be able to really speak with authenticity and authority on the topics that we invest ourselves in. You know, so another thing that you mentioned was reading, and to be able to curate the information that we take on board. And I wonder, you know, how important is this track for people who want to be, and obviously, you know, these influencers person of just hustling harder than the next person. You know, do you see that in your community of people just, you know, continually doing it on their own, not balancing it out with these real life connections, being able to, you know, this almost impossible ideal of a work-life balance? I mean, maybe the question there would be, how should one structure one's life as an entrepreneur in amongst all this noise?
Yeah, I guess what's sort of implied in this kind of community setting with creators is that they have a great feedback loop, actually. So every time they're producing content, they're getting feedback on it, you know, in the comments, in the likes, in the relative positioning of that content against their previous posts and against everything else that's happening in the day. So they know this resonated or this didn't. So that's cool. And if they extend that methodology to say, how do I get feedback from the market about what I want to do? If you're building with social capital, you will tend to find product market fit a lot quicker than if you're building with financial capital and just locking yourself in the room for 2 years and coming out and say, hey, check out my project or this thing that I've built, and hoping that it works. So I think there's absolutely that. I think it's a great trait to be able to have the empathy and vulnerability to ask for feedback, even when something looks shoddy. You know, you want to do that. You want to say, this is my idea. shoot holes in it. Tell me what would you use? How would you like it? Where should it be sharpened? So I think that's a very key part. So we don't have to hustle to dare. I think the other part related to that is a guide of, and almost, you it's an inexperienced thing that you, I guess, only appreciate in time and through other people's narratives, is that you want to have like 80% of your time to sharpen the axe and 20% of your time to chop down the tree. I think people are busy for the sake of being busy a lot of the time, and they, building or delivering on something that wasn't quite well thought out. And if you spend a little bit of a longer time thinking about it, testing the ideas, getting the feedback, measure twice, cut once is the woodworking adage. But that's probably a better guide to getting a product to serve a community. And your points around finding your niche being one or two. And then once you've got that product market fit, you can scale either geographically or with other products to the same audience, whatever the strategy is. So yeah, I'd probably say that those would be two things I'd consider if I was on that journey.
So, Murray, can you, in terms of your experience over the last 11 years of being in this game, can you cast your mind back to maybe an example or examples of campaigns or tactics that have just like blown you away? Something that has both been impacted to you, but also actually worked from a strategic perspective.
Sure. So many to think through. I think the ones that, and without being specific about brand or campaign, but sort of the baseline was where that brand engaged in, you could kind of sort of think about it as shared value. So for the brand, what was a good message that you could have for the brand, and what was a good message for the audience? And then this overlap of the Venn diagram was where that value was. So it was a good story to tell, because it was transformative and it had some value, and there was meaning for it, and it was a good representation of what the brand's niche and value offering or value proposition was. And where those two kind of fit together, that's where you have that real spark. A lot of the time, you mentioned people want to position themselves as the hero, but most of the time, the brands are just a support actor or actress in the main event. The Aston Martin that James Bond drives is not the hero. It's a means to an end for him to look good, but also travel fast and have some extra gear along the way. And there's a lot of ego that goes into that. So where you get confused as to who's the winner supposed to be here, and who's the main character. The main character energy must go to the customer. It mustn't be you. Yeah. So I think it would be along those lines.
It's such a good point, and it speaks to a kind of honesty that we need to introduce into our feedback loop. Like you mentioned, your community has this baked in kind of loop that they have with the mechanisms of distribution, where you can immediately see what's working and what's not. And it feels like there's a part of it that requires us to be, there's almost like a, for want of a better term, like an emotional maturity, a sort of almost like a vulnerability to put out, and particularly as creative individuals, which most entrepreneurs are, no matter what category they're in, this idea of putting it out to the world and being mature enough to take that feedback without it being deemed as a failure, rather as information, as grist for the mill to continue. Yeah. We have a phrase at Heavy Chef. We say, start with feelings, finish with facts. And the reason why that's important for us is because when we start from that gut brain perspective, that creative part of us, where we put it out, we're emotionally vulnerable, we know that the answer may actually be a negative one, that it's no less important than if it's positive. In fact, often it's more important because it gives us this data that allows us to improve, to iteratively improve. And yet we're so terrified of failure, particularly in South Africa for some reason, you know. Failure seems to be such a a big letter on our chest, and it's like it's not, it's just not accepted, you know. And yet we need to somehow create this mind shift. For me, one of the best and most lasting concepts, you know, that I guess civilization has granted us is the scientific method, which in a sense can now be can be translated or overlapped, transposed to the lean startup method, where essentially, you know, you take the data of failure and you are able to continually iterate and course correct and improve. And I think that's something that you've mentioned and you've spoken about in the way that one should think about, you know, this feedback loop of improving the communication. I have we're almost out of time, Murray, and I've actually got so many more questions for you, but I'm sorry that I'm like rambling a little bit, but I wanted to just quickly touch upon one thing that really was interesting to me. In your recipe, you mentioned your secret ingredient as being resilience. And it's such an interesting one for me because it speaks to so much of what's important for entrepreneurs. You know, Angela Duckworth spoke about it in her famous TED Talk, and there's so many, you know, examples of resilience is important. I have a friend who keeps saying, you know, the biggest advice that he has for entrepreneurs, he's an exceptionally successful entrepreneur himself, is just stay in the game, because often success is just around the corner from failure, you know, and we feel like we're failing until there's some breakthrough which the universe just provides, and we don't even know when it's going to come. If we just stay in the game, it will happen eventually, you know. And I wanted to ask you, can you think back on your life, and particularly in your business career, where, you know, this stick-to-itness, this resilience, which is so important for us, has been in as you know, has shone through and has been able to, you know, has been an example for when you had to really push hard and you almost failed, but because you stayed in the game, that you were able to get to the position you are now.
Yeah, I guess it maps to what we were talking just now about failure. Is a lot of the conditioning that we have is made out to be that you were nothing, and then you got onto the front page of the newspaper, TechCrunch, the Wall Street Journal, whatever. And, you know, whether that relates to an event with friends, your business, a meeting, we have this belief that everything should be like the ultimate, like slam dunk, massive fireworks type of thing. And there's parts of that I think are true, but actually it's just keep it up. Just, you know, you don't need to not get to that by avoiding it. All you need to do is sort of plug away and make a good enough version of it and keep going. So, you know, I guess my experience is, you know, when you're young and you're new to the corporate world, you sort of look up the organogram. You're like, sure, those guys are smart. They really, really know what they're up to, and there's no ways that I'd be able to do what they can do. I wish I could be like them one day. And then, you know, when you know 10 or 20 years goes by, you realize that all you had to do was just keep your ears open, and you kind of learn a lot of this stuff just, you know, by being in the game. You see all of the examples, you find the patterns, you understand the, you know, the repeatable processes that are, you know, they're not exactly the same, but they're rhyming with previous times that you've looked at things. And if you just stay in the game long enough, then a lot of people, for, you know, actually pretty sad reasons, fall out of the game. And, if you think about the game of life, like and Outlive by Peter Thiel is a great book to read. But so much of the start of the downfall of a person's health span, so not their lifespan, but their health span. When did they have good health, and when did that start going off a cliff? Is one small little injury that could be stubbing their toe, or bumping their hip, or something that takes them out of their routine, which was otherwise good. It was good eating, it was good exercising, it was good social contact. And that one little bump often is the demise of their health span. And the same applies to your professional world. You want to stay in the game as long as possible. You want to be as healthy as you can. You want to turn up with as much energy as you can every day. And you just don't want to miss out on what's happening. So if you're doing those things, like having good information diet, good decision framework, you have the grit and the resilience to kind of keep going. That's actually what wins the game a lot more of the time. And compounding is the eighth wonder of the world for a reason. So if you can play that to your benefit, then definitely pursue that.
I love that. So it's such a good point. I also enjoy Peter Thiel, by the way. I finished Outlive a little while ago, and he speaks about this idea of the marginal decade. And it's such a great concept, because it's like down the line, somewhere along the line, we're going to enter our last decade, but we're training for it. We're training for that time when we want to improve the quality of life that we will have at some, it's some phase on our journey. And it's more important than we think. And I think it also speaks to this idea of meaning and purpose. And again, the idea of the conversation, having people around you that can provide you with the perspective that we need in order to stay real, stay humble, to stay authentic, to be, somebody that can speak the truth about whatever category they're in, I think is just vital. Murray, thank you so much for your time, my man. It's been such a treat to be able to catch up with you again, and I look forward to seeing you in real life, IRL, as the young kids say, in Harrington Street. And yeah, dude, you've done so well. You've created such a great category and a niche that you are definitely the front runner in this country. And so I commend you, sir, and your recipe is absolutely brilliant. I encourage everybody who's watching this to check it out and to enjoy it and to give us feedback. And yeah, I think this is definitely the first of many meetings between us, Murray. So I look forward to seeing you again soon, sir.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Fred, and keep up the amazing work with Heavy Chef. I think it's such a beautiful on-ramp for all entrepreneurs and young digitally minded people to learn about the world and learn from some of the experiences of others that have been before them.
Oh, thank you, my man. That's very much appreciated. And yeah, long may this relationship continue. But we'll be chatting again soon. Okay, cheers, everybody, and thanks for the time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Okay, bye.